What if I told you that what you are experiencing right now is not just coincidence? What if the confusion, the pressure, and even the shaking you see all around you are not random events, but deliberate signals from heaven? God never moves without giving His chosen ones a sign. The question is not whether God is speaking. The question is, are you paying attention? Something big is happening right now, and only those who are awake will recognize it. To be chosen by God means you cannot afford to live casually. You cannot live as though the times are ordinary, because chosen people are always aligned with extraordinary moments. Privilege always comes with responsibility. You cannot claim the blessing of being chosen and ignore the weight of being positioned. The world may see chaos, but chosen ones must see strategy. What looks like disruption is often divine realignment, heaven shifting things into place for His purpose. Every generation has moments when God interrupts human history. These interruptions rarely come in comfort, they come in shaking. A system collapses, a kingdom is shaken, a culture loses its grip, and suddenly what seemed permanent is no longer stable. Yet for God's chosen ones, this is never the time to panic. It is the time to perceive. The book of Daniel speaks of kings rising and falling, yet it affirms that heaven rules over all. When God shifts, He is not just rearranging nations, He is unveiling hidden purposes. Things long concealed are brought to the surface, assignments long dormant begin to stir, and chosen vessels rise when others retreat. God always gives signs before major shifts in the earth. He has never moved silently when it comes to His chosen ones. From the beginning of creation, God established a pattern. He reveals before He acts, He announces before He manifests, and He signals before He shifts. The challenge is not whether God speaks, but whether His people are paying attention to the signs He has placed in front of them. When the flood was coming, God raised Noah as a sign. His building of the ark was not just a project, it was a prophetic signal that change was about to sweep the earth. Yet the majority dismissed it because they could not interpret the season. In the same way, when something significant is about to happen in your life or in the world, God will never leave you without a sign. The signs may not always come in spectacular ways. Sometimes they come through disruptions, sometimes through unusual events, sometimes through shifts in people around you, but they are always there. Signs are God's mercy extended to humanity. They are His way of saying, pay attention, something is about to change. Think about the star that appeared when Jesus was born. That was not just a natural phenomenon. It was heaven signaling that divinity had entered human history. The wise men discerned the sign, but many in Israel ignored it. God does not send signs for decoration, He sends them for direction. Every sign carries an instruction, a call to prepare, a reminder that what you see is not random but orchestrated. The signs of our times are telling us that heaven is rearranging things, that the world as we know it is shifting under the weight of divine purpose. The problem is that signs are often misinterpreted because people look at them through the lens of fear rather than faith. When a shaking comes, many cry out that it is the end. But chosen ones must know that a shaking is not the end, it is the beginning of something new. When Egypt was shaken with plagues, it looked like destruction, but for Israel, it was the signal that deliverance was at the door. When the early church was scattered through persecution, it looked like collapse, but it was the signal that the gospel was about to spread to nations far beyond Jerusalem. If you only see the sign as disaster, you miss the invitation hidden in it. Every sign carries an opportunity, but only those who interpret with spiritual eyes will recognize it. God's signs are rarely comfortable. They are designed to disturb complacency. If life remained smooth and predictable, no one would seek God for answers. But when the earth shakes, when economies falter, when cultures shift, when norms are challenged, these are signs that something bigger is happening beyond human control. For the chosen ones, these signs are not meant to breed panic, but to awaken perception. They remind you that God is still directing history, that heaven is not silent, and that you have a part to play in what He is unfolding. Signs are not just about what is coming. They are about how you must position yourself now. Throughout Scripture, God gave His chosen people signs to anchor their faith. Gideon was given a fleece, not because God needed convincing, but because Gideon needed assurance. Elijah called down fire, not to prove his power, but to signal that God was turning Israel's heart back to Himself. Jesus healed the sick and raised the dead as signs of the kingdom breaking into human experience. These signs were not the fullness of God's work. They were the evidence that something greater was happening. In the same way, what you see around you right now may just be signs, not the finished story. They are indicators pointing towards something greater that God is about to establish. The danger lies in ignoring the signs. When people dismiss divine signals, they often miss divine seasons. The Pharisees could interpret the weather by looking at the sky, but they could not interpret the times though the Messiah stood in front of them. Signs require discernment. You must go beyond the surface and ask God, what are you saying in this moment? What are you preparing me for? How must I align myself with what you are doing? To see the sign without seeking its meaning is to waste a divine clue. Chosen ones cannot afford to walk blind. They must stay alert, aware, and sensitive to the movements of heaven. Even in your personal life, God gives signs before shifting you. An unexpected ending, a closed door, a stirring in your spirit that will not leave. These are not random. They are signals that God is preparing you for something different. Sometimes you may not like the sign because it disrupts your comfort. But chosen ones must learn to trust the sign more than the feeling. The sign is never sent to destroy you, it is sent to direct you. The difference between those who step into destiny and those who miss it is often their response to the signs God sends. Some complain, others delay, but the chosen interpret and act. This is why you must never dismiss the times you are living in as ordinary. There are signals all around you that heaven is moving. The question is not whether God is speaking. The question is whether you will open your eyes to see the signs and position yourself for the shift that is already unfolding. Being chosen comes with both privilege and responsibility. Many celebrate the idea of being chosen, yet very few pause to consider what it truly demands. To be chosen by God is not simply to be favored, it is to be entrusted. God never chooses casually. When He sets His hand upon a person, He does so because there is an assignment that must be carried, a role that must be fulfilled, a weight that must be borne. Chosen status is not a crown of comfort, it is a mantle of calling. Privilege means access, but responsibility means accountability. God elevates you, not to make you comfortable, but to make you useful for His purpose. Think of Israel as a nation. Out of all the peoples of the earth, God chose them to be His own. That was privilege. They carried His covenant, His promises, His protection. Yet along with that privilege came the responsibility to reflect His character, to obey His instructions, to be a light to other nations. Every time they forgot their responsibility, they stumbled, because privilege without responsibility breeds arrogance. God's choosing is not about status, it is about stewardship. You are not chosen to boast about your position. You are chosen to manage a mission. Being chosen also sets you apart. Separation is part of the cost. When God chooses you, He calls you out of the ordinary, out of the familiar, out of the crowd. You cannot walk where everyone else walks or indulge in everything others indulge in. Samson was chosen before birth, and as part of that calling, he was to live under a vow that restricted his lifestyle. While others cut their hair freely, he could not. While others lived without restraint, he had to carry discipline. That was the responsibility of his privilege. To be chosen is to accept that your life is not your own. You are owned by the assignment God has placed within you. With privilege comes visibility, and with visibility comes scrutiny. When you are chosen, you are watched. Your actions speak louder, your choices echo farther, your mistakes impact deeper. This is why responsibility is so heavy. David was chosen as king, and when he walked in obedience, the whole nation prospered. But when he sinned, the whole nation suffered. Chosen people cannot afford to live carelessly because their lives are tied to more than themselves. They are tied to those God has connected to their assignment. Responsibility means recognizing that your obedience affects more than just your own destiny. Privilege also grants access to God's presence in unique ways. Chosen people often experience divine favor, unusual opportunities, supernatural guidance. This is a gift, but it is also a trust. God reveals himself not for entertainment, but for alignment. When Moses encountered the burning bush, it was not just a display of fire, it was a call to responsibility. The privilege of standing on holy ground came with the command to deliver a nation. When Isaiah saw the Lord high and lifted up, the privilege of that vision came with the responsibility to carry a prophetic message to a rebellious people. Privilege without embracing responsibility leads to wasted encounters. Being chosen will also bring testing. Privilege does not exempt you from trials, it attracts them. The enemy targets what God values. Joseph was chosen through dreams of greatness, but responsibility meant enduring betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before stepping into authority. His privilege was real, but so was his responsibility to remain faithful when nothing around him looked like favor. The weight of being chosen is revealed in the test of perseverance. Will you remain obedient when the privilege feels invisible and the responsibility feels overwhelming? Responsibility also means discipline. Chosen people cannot rely on feelings alone. They must cultivate habits, convictions, and integrity that sustain them in seasons where privilege does not feel apparent. The disciples were privileged to walk with Jesus, to see miracles no one else witnessed. Yet their responsibility was to carry the message after he left, to build the church in the face of persecution, to lay down their lives for the gospel. Their privilege would have meant nothing if they had not shouldered their responsibility. In our time, many want the title of being chosen without the weight of responsibility. They want favor without sacrifice, visibility without accountability, promotion without preparation. But heaven does not operate that way. God will not release the full privilege of being chosen until you prove that you can handle the responsibility that comes with it. The higher the privilege, the greater the responsibility. To be chosen is to be trusted by God to carry something larger than yourself, to steward his agenda on earth. So, to be chosen is not just a matter of identity, it is a matter of duty. It is to accept that your life has been claimed by heaven, that your steps are ordered by purpose, that your decisions cannot be casual. Privilege may make you rejoice, but responsibility should make you sober. Chosen ones walk with the joy of access, but also with the weight of accountability. They are not called to blend in, they are called to stand out, to lead, to serve, to sacrifice, and to represent God faithfully before the world. Disruptions and crises often signal divine realignment. What most people call chaos, heaven often calls correction. When everything around you feels like it is falling apart, it may actually be falling into place. God has a way of shaking what is unstable to reveal what is unshakable. And many times the path to his divine plan is paved with what looks like disorder. The problem is that human eyes see disruption as loss, but spiritual eyes see it as transition. If you only interpret your crisis through emotion, you will panic. But if you interpret it through revelation, you will perceive that God is at work behind the curtain, aligning people, places, and events with his purpose. Think about the story of Joseph. His life looked like a series of disruptions. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown into prison. To anyone watching, His story looked tragic, like a life unraveling. But heaven was orchestrating realignment. Each disruption was pushing Joseph closer to the palace, closer to the position where he would save nations. Without betrayal, there would have been no Egypt. Without Egypt, there would have been no preservation of Israel. What looked like crisis was actually God shifting Joseph into place. Your life may feel like Joseph's story at times, scattered by disruptions, but divine alignment is often hidden in the very places that look like breakdown. The early church also thrived through disruption. When persecution arose, believers were scattered. To the natural eye, it looked like destruction. The community was broken, leaders were attacked, families were uprooted. Yet out of that scattering came the spread of the gospel across regions and nations. The disruption was not the end of the church. It was the expansion of the church. Crisis forced them out of comfort zones into places they never imagined reaching. This is the way of God. He allows what feels like loss to become the catalyst for multiplication. What feels like chaos in your world might just be God planting you in new territory. Disruption is also God's way of ending what you would never end on your own. Sometimes you cling to situations, relationships, or systems long after their season has expired. Left on your own, you would stay in comfort zones forever. But crisis has a way of forcing you out. When Israel grew comfortable in Egypt, they might have settled permanently in slavery, if not for the disruption of plagues and pressure that forced Pharaoh's hand. The crisis was painful, but it opened the door to freedom. What looks like loss often carries the seed of liberation. If God shakes it, it means it can no longer hold you. Crisis exposes what is temporary and what is eternal. When everything is stable, you cannot always tell the difference. But when the shaking comes, the foundations are revealed. You begin to see what truly lasts and what cannot withstand pressure. Relationships are tested, motives are exposed, priorities are clarified. This is why crises are not random, they are divine audits. God uses them to sift your life, to remove what should not remain, and to strengthen what must endure. The shaking feels uncomfortable, but it is necessary to align your life with heaven's blueprint. Sometimes disruptions are not external but internal. You may feel restless, unsettled, unable to find peace in what once satisfied you. That inner disruption is a signal too. It is God stirring your spirit, making you uncomfortable with mediocrity, pulling you away from shallow pursuits. When God is realigning you, He often disrupts your appetite. What used to excite you no longer fulfills you, because He is preparing you for something greater. Ignoring that restlessness will only prolong the process. Leaning into it will accelerate your alignment. Look at how Jesus disrupted traditions. To the religious leaders, He seemed to cause crisis, challenging laws, overturning tables, calling out hypocrisy. But His disruption was necessary for realignment. The old order could no longer contain the kingdom He was bringing. Every disruption in His ministry was a signal that heaven was establishing a new order. Likewise, in your life, when God disrupts your routines, it is because He is introducing something new that cannot fit into the old structure. Divine realignment always follows crisis. The shaking clears the stage, the disruption removes the excess, and the crisis forces a shift that positions you closer to destiny. But only those who look with spiritual discernment will see the opportunity hidden in the storm. If you only complain about the shaking, you will miss the strategy inside it. God never allows disruption without direction. Every crisis has a purpose. Every shaking carries an instruction. Every disruption signals that heaven is at work, moving you into the place where His will can be fulfilled through your life. Unusual opposition is often one of the clearest indicators that you are moving in divine alignment. When you begin to see resistance rise against you in unexpected ways, it is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong. More often, it is evidence that you are advancing into territory that threatens the enemy. Resistance does not come to people who pose no threat. It comes to those who are shifting atmospheres, breaking cycles, and stepping into assignments that carry weight in the kingdom. That is why the moment you decide to walk in obedience, distractions multiply, conflicts appear, and pressures seem to intensify. It is not punishment, it is confirmation. Think about David long before he became king. The moment he was anointed, opposition began to track his life. Goliath stood in his path, and after victory over the giant, Saul's jealousy grew into relentless pursuit. David's anointing painted a target on his back. Every battle was not simply a fight for survival. It was proof that he carried something the enemy feared. If David had no calling, Saul would not have wasted years chasing him. The unusual opposition was a sign of unusual purpose. In the same way, the attacks you face are often proportionate to the anointing you carry. Jesus himself encountered constant opposition. From the moment of his birth, Herod sought to destroy him. Throughout his ministry, Pharisees and Sadducees plotted against him. Even his own disciples misunderstood him. Yet, the opposition never derailed him. It only confirmed that his mission disrupted the powers of darkness. When you align with heaven, you will inevitably conflict with systems, mindsets, and powers that oppose God's kingdom. The pressure is not accidental. It is strategic resistance designed to test your endurance and prove your authenticity. Opposition often comes in forms that are deeply personal. Sometimes it is not strangers who resist you, but those closest to you. Joseph's greatest opposition came not from outsiders, but from his own brothers. The people who should have celebrated him became the very ones who sold him into slavery. This teaches a critical truth. Unusual opposition will often emerge in familiar places. It may come through relationships, family, or trusted circles. The enemy knows that the closer the opposition, the deeper the wound. But remember, even betrayal has purpose. Without his brother's actions, Joseph would never have reached Egypt. What felt like destruction was actually redirection. The nature of opposition also reveals the magnitude of your assignment. Small callings attract small resistance. Great callings attract great warfare. That is why you cannot compare your journey with someone else's. You might see others advancing smoothly, while your path seems to be lined with obstacles. Do not misinterpret the difference. Their assignment may not demand the same level of resistance. The heavier the opposition, the greater the confirmation that your assignment carries generational weight. Unusual opposition also exposes what is within you. Pressure reveals character. It shows whether your faith is built on convenience or conviction. When doors close, when accusations rise, when resources seem to dry up, opposition tests whether you will keep walking by faith or retreat into fear. The opposition is not only about external resistance, it is about internal refinement. Every challenge sharpens your discernment, strengthens your endurance, and deepens your dependence on God. What looks like an attack is often an opportunity to grow in maturity. Consider how opposition sharpens focus. When everything is comfortable, it is easy to become distracted by secondary pursuits. But when resistance rises, it forces you to identify what truly matters. Nehemiah faced constant opposition while rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Enemies tried to distract him, intimidate him, and lure him away from his work. But opposition clarified his mission. His response was, "I am doing a great work, and I cannot come down." Without the opposition, Nehemiah might have entertained compromises. With opposition, his focus became unshakable. Likewise, resistance in your life is not simply about stopping you. It is about refining your vision so you do not waste energy on what does not serve your purpose. Sometimes unusual opposition reveals hidden support. Elijah, after calling down fire on Mount Carmel, faced intense opposition from Jezebel. He ran into the wilderness, convinced he was alone. But in the place of opposition, God revealed to him that 7,000 others had not bowed to Baal. Opposition can create the illusion of isolation, But often it is the setup for discovering that you are not as alone as you think. It is in the middle of warfare that divine connections, hidden allies, and supernatural provisions appear. Unusual opposition also signals timing. The enemy intensifies his resistance when you are closest to breakthrough. Battles often rage fiercest right before the door opens. The Red Sea did not part until Pharaoh's army was pressing close. Daniel's prayer was resisted by spiritual opposition for 21 days, but the answer was already on its way. This shows that the intensity of your struggle can be a prophetic indicator that your season of release is near. Opposition rises because heaven is shifting something in your favor, and the enemy fears the impact of what is coming. When God begins to move in your life in unusual ways, one of the clearest signs is an overwhelming sense of urgency. It is that inner pull that refuses to let you settle for where you are, even when everything around you appears stable. It is not mere excitement, nor is it human ambition. It is a divine stirring, a spiritual clock ticking in your spirit, telling you that time is short and movement is required. This urgency can be uncomfortable because it disrupts your normal rhythm. You may find yourself restless at night, unable to enjoy what once gave you peace, sensing that something bigger is calling you forward. That urgency is not a burden, it is a signal that heaven is pressing you into position for a critical assignment. Consider how Noah felt when God gave him instructions to build the ark. At that moment, there was no rain, no storm clouds, no visible reason for urgency. Yet the urgency of heaven compelled him to begin. He labored for years on something people mocked, because his inner conviction was stronger than outward evidence. That urgency saved his family and preserved creation. When God places urgency in your spirit, it will rarely align with your circumstances. It will call you to act ahead of time, to move before others understand, to prepare for what is coming even when nothing looks different. The urgency is not about what is visible, it is about what is invisible, what heaven has already scheduled. Urgency also produces separation. While others may be content to move slowly, to delay obedience, or to procrastinate, you feel the weight of immediacy. You cannot linger in conversations that waste time. You cannot indulge in habits that drain energy. You cannot remain tied to people who have no sense of divine timing. The urgency inside you will pull you away from the ordinary. It will isolate you from crowds, not because you think you are better, but because you know you cannot afford to be distracted. The more urgent the assignment, the more costly the distractions become. God removes peace from what no longer serves you so that you will have no choice but to move forward. Look at Jesus during his ministry. He carried an urgency that startled his disciples. He would often say, "My time has not yet come," or "One must work while it is day, for night is coming." He was acutely aware that every moment carried purpose. That urgency did not make him anxious, but it did keep him focused. He did not waste words, did not waste opportunities, did not waste relationships. Every move was aligned with his mission because he knew the window was short. When God places urgency in your spirit, it will shift how you spend your time. You will measure your days differently, weighing every decision against your assignment. Urgency is also connected to preparation. When the Spirit of God begins to press upon you, it is because something is coming that you cannot handle in your current state. The urgency pushes you to pray more, to fast, to study, to separate yourself, because what is ahead requires more capacity. Think of Esther. When the decree went out to destroy her people, urgency fell upon her. She did not have the luxury of hesitation. She entered a season of fasting and prayer, and that urgency prepared her to step before the king with boldness. Without that urgency, she might have remained silent and missed her moment. When heaven accelerates your spirit, it is always for preparation before manifestation. Another sign of divine urgency is the tension you feel between the present and the future. You may feel grateful for where you are, yet dissatisfied at the same time. Others may see your life as successful, but inside you know it is incomplete. That dissatisfaction is not ingratitude, it is a holy urgency. It is God letting you know that this is not the final stop. He disturbs your comfort so that you do not make camp where you were only supposed to pass through. The urgency will not allow you to settle, because settling would mean forfeiting the greater assignment waiting on the other side. Urgency also aligns with opportunities. Many times, God places urgency in your spirit because a window is opening that will not remain open forever. He presses you to move quickly, not recklessly, but decisively. The children of Israel experienced this on the night of the Passover. They were instructed to eat in haste, with their sandals on, ready to move. The urgency was a signal that deliverance was near, but it also demanded readiness. Had they delayed, they would have missed the moment. When God stirs urgency in you, it is His way of positioning you to seize opportunities before they close. Urgency is often misunderstood by others. People who do not carry your assignment may call you impatient, restless, or overly intense. They may not understand why you cannot relax, why you feel pressed to act, why you live with such focus. But the truth is that urgency is not for them, it is for you. God does not give everyone the same measure of urgency, because not everyone is on the same timeline. Your urgency is tailored to your mission, and if you ignore it, you risk missing the moment that was designed for you alone. One of the most striking signs that God is moving in your life in a powerful way is the unusual weight of responsibility that suddenly rests on your shoulders. It is not a responsibility that you volunteered for, nor one that you can easily escape. It is the sense that heaven has entrusted you with something greater than yourself, something that carries consequences not only for you, but for others connected to your life. This weight is different from human pressure or personal ambition. It is the mantle of divine stewardship. It feels heavy because it is holy. You recognize that your decisions, your obedience, and your faithfulness will affect more than just your own destiny. You begin to realize that your life is not your own, that you have been set apart as a vessel for purposes bigger than your comfort. Moses carried this kind of responsibility. He never asked to lead Israel out of Egypt. In fact, he argued with God at the burning bush, listing reasons why he was not qualified. But once God placed the responsibility upon him, he could not return to a normal life. The weight of an entire nation rested on his obedience. That responsibility drove him to his knees, forced him to depend on God, and shaped him into one of the greatest leaders in history. The unusual weight of responsibility in your life may feel overwhelming, but it is also the very force that will refine your character and stretch your capacity. Carrying divine responsibility always feels bigger than your ability. That is intentional. If the task before you could be accomplished in your own strength, it would not require faith. God gives assignments that expose your insufficiency so that you will lean on His sufficiency. The weight pushes you out of self-reliance and into total dependence on Him. Gideon experienced this when he was called to deliver Israel with an army so small it seemed impossible. The responsibility pressed him into a place where he had no choice but to trust God completely. That is the design of divine responsibility. It is not meant to crush you, but to strip you of pride and force you to walk in partnership with heaven. This weight also produces an unusual sensitivity to timing and obedience. You realize that every step matters, every choice counts, and every delay can have consequences. This awareness is not meant to paralyze you with fear, but to awaken a deeper level of stewardship. Esther carried this when she was told, "Perhaps you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this." Her sense of responsibility shifted her perspective. She could no longer live as a passive queen in the palace while her people faced destruction. The weight of responsibility compelled her to act, to risk her life, and to step into her assignment with courage. The more God entrusts to you, the more He awakens you to the reality that your position, your gifts, and your influence are not for your own benefit but for His greater purpose. Responsibility also reshapes your priorities. When the mantle of heaven rests upon you, you cannot live as casually as others. You cannot waste time on trivial pursuits because the assignment demands focus. Nehemiah felt this when he was rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. Opposition tried to distract him, but he carried the weight of responsibility so heavily that he declared, "I am doing a great work and I cannot come down." The responsibility gave him clarity. It allowed him to separate what was urgent from what was important, and it kept him aligned with the mission despite constant resistance. The same will happen in your life. The more responsibility you carry, the more disciplined your priorities will become. Carrying unusual responsibility often isolates you. You cannot always explain to others why you move differently, why you make sacrifices they do not understand, why you cannot compromise when they would easily give in. Responsibility demands consecration. Jesus Himself carried this. As the weight of the cross drew closer, He withdrew from crowds more often, spent nights in prayer, and carried burdens that even His closest disciples could not comprehend. The Garden of Gethsemane was a picture of responsibility pressing Him so heavily that His sweat became drops of blood. Yet it was that same responsibility that empowered Him to endure the cross and redeem humanity. The heavier the responsibility, the more consecration is required. This weight also sharpens accountability. You begin to realize that your life is no longer private, that your actions influence more people than you can see. The responsibility causes you to live with greater integrity, knowing that lapses in your character could derail not only your journey, but also those who look to you for leadership. Paul carried this awareness. He often spoke of being entrusted with the mysteries of the gospel and the weight of caring for the churches. His letters reveal the inner burden of responsibility that drove him to labor tirelessly, endure hardship, and keep his conscience clear before God and man. The greater the responsibility, the higher the accountability. Unusual responsibility also comes with unusual grace. While the weight may feel impossible, God never entrusts you with something without equipping you to bear it. His grace expands your capacity in ways you never imagined. You find yourself handling pressures that would have broken you in another season. You speak words you never studied, lead in ways you were never trained, endure situations you thought would destroy you. This is the paradox of responsibility. It feels crushing, yet it carries empowerment. What feels like a burden is actually a sign of divine trust. Heaven would not lay it upon you if you were not chosen to carry it. One of the most overlooked but powerful signs that God is moving in your life is the surge of unusual clarity in the middle of confusion. When everything around you seems uncertain, when circumstances are shifting, and when voices are pulling you in every direction, there comes a moment when the Spirit of God begins to clear the fog and align your focus. It is not clarity that comes from your own intellect, nor is it clarity that can be explained logically. It is as though heaven suddenly places a spotlight on what matters most, cutting through distractions and doubts, showing you where to step next. This kind of clarity is supernatural. It comes in whispers during prayer. It comes through convictions that won't leave you. It comes in those sudden moments when what once felt complicated now seems undeniably simple. This unusual clarity often arrives after a season of uncertainty. God sometimes allows you to walk through confusion to teach you that human reasoning will not sustain you. The disciples experienced this constantly with Jesus. They often could not understand His parables, His timing, or His decisions. But then, in key moments, revelation broke through, and suddenly their eyes were opened. On the road to Emmaus, 2 disciples walked in confusion, blinded by disappointment, unable to recognize the risen Christ. Yet in a moment, clarity came as He broke bread, and their hearts burned with understanding. Confusion is the setup, but clarity is the breakthrough. When clarity comes, it redefines everything that looked dark before. Clarity is often accompanied by conviction. Once God reveals the next step, you feel a deep certainty that you cannot ignore. Others may question your choices, and circumstances may appear to contradict your direction, but the clarity in your spirit anchors you. Abraham experienced this when God told him to leave his homeland. There was no map, no explanation, no detailed plan, yet there was clarity in his spirit that he had to obey. That clarity gave him courage to step away from familiarity into destiny. True clarity from God will often demand action that looks irrational to others but undeniable to you. Unusual clarity also silences unnecessary voices. When you carry divine clarity, you no longer feel the need to debate with everyone around you. You do not waste energy convincing those who cannot see what God has shown you. Jesus modeled this. Often, after performing miracles or giving instructions, he told people not to tell anyone. He was clear on his timing, clear on his mission, and clear that not every revelation was for public discussion. Clarity brings restraint. It teaches you when to speak and when to stay silent, when to act and when to wait. It is not just about knowing where to go, it is about knowing how to move. Another aspect of unusual clarity is the ability to see through distractions. Life is full of noise, opinions, opportunities, crises, temptations. Without clarity, you waste energy chasing shadows. But when God grants you clarity, you see through the noise. Nehemiah experienced this while rebuilding the walls. His enemies tried to distract him with meetings and threats, but clarity kept him focused. He knew his assignment, and that knowledge gave him the strength to refuse detours. Clarity protects you from wasting years on things that do not contribute to your calling. It gives you the discipline to say no to good things in order to preserve energy for the right things. Clarity also transforms your relationship with time. When you know what God is calling you to do, you stop treating your days casually. You recognize that every hour matters, every decision matters, every opportunity matters. Paul lived with this kind of urgency. His clarity about his mission to preach the gospel drove him to travel relentlessly, write letters, and endure persecution without hesitation. He knew his assignment, and that clarity made him relentless. Without clarity, you drift. With clarity, you accelerate. It redeems your time because you stop living reactively and start living intentionally. Unusual clarity often comes in quiet moments rather than dramatic ones. Elijah discovered this when he was weary and discouraged. He expected God to speak through the wind, the earthquake, or the fire. Instead, clarity came in a gentle whisper. That whisper was enough to redirect his steps and restore his mission. Many times you wait for a dramatic sign, but God gives you clarity in subtle ways, through stillness, through prayer, through peace that surpasses understanding. The clarity may not answer every question, but it gives you enough light for the next step, and often that is all you need. Clarity brings alignment between your inner world and God's purposes. It quiets the battle between your desires and His will, because suddenly you see why He closed certain doors, why He ended certain relationships, why He delayed certain answers. What once felt painful begins to make sense in the light of clarity. You realize that His plan was always bigger, that His timing was always wiser, and that His hand was guiding you even when you could not see it. Clarity reveals that the confusion was never wasted. It was preparation for a deeper understanding.